Forced to work from home by your employer? Laid off or feeling depressed at home? Do you want to make money working from anywhere? We'll show you how to do it from your couch. It's time for another episode of the Work From Home Show. Coming to you from their homes in Austin, Texas and Tampa, Florida, here are your hosts, Adam and Naresh.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Work From Home Show. Shout out to all of our homies, homeboys, homegirls, home trans, all the work from homers out there. I'm Naresh. Today we have Alex Tapscott on the show. He is the managing director of the digital assets group at Ninepoint Partners. He's co-founder of the Blockchain Research Institute, also called BRI, with his dad, Don Tapscott. He's also the #1 best-selling co-author of Blockchain Revolution, How the Technology Behind Bitcoin is Changing Money, Business, and the World. And the new book, Web3, Charting the Internet's Next Economic and Cultural Frontier. Alex Tapscott, thank you so much for joining us on the Work From Home Show.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
You talk about some deep topics that I think almost, not even a majority, almost everyone just doesn't know enough about. How did you, or they don't even know like what NFTs mean or like what blockchain is. How did you get interested into these topics? I know you co-authored some books with your dad, did some ventures with your dad. Was he the influence?
Well, the story starts back in 2014, actually, so nearly a decade ago, in fact. And at the time, I was actually working in traditional finance and investment banking. And all of a sudden, I started to hear a lot about this thing called Bitcoin. Now, this is before the word blockchain or Web3 or NFT or any of those terms you just said had entered the vernacular. There was really this one sort of new and kind of strange invention, right? This cryptocurrency, as people were calling it. And the more that I looked into it, the more convinced I became that this was more than just a new asset you could trade and maybe make or lose money on. And it was maybe more than a financial technology that I thought basically blockchains could be foundational to, a new internet or a new kind of asset class. And the timing was really interesting because around that time, my dad had been doing his own investigation. So as you kind of alluded to, my dad is a pretty prolific business author. He's written over 15 books on business and technology. And he was trying to figure out whether Bitcoin was a new kind of technology that was enabling global problem solving. And he didn't have anybody to, lead the investigation. So while I was still working, he actually asked me, hey, do you want to join our team to lead this investigation? And I said, sure, that sounds like a great idea. So in my spare time on, weekends and evenings, I started doing this work. And we eventually collaborated on several different, major pieces of research. And that research that we worked on together became the basis for a book proposal for Blockchain Revolution, that first book. And basically, we shopped it around, and Penguin Random House thought it was great, bought the rights, and he gave me basically an offer I couldn't refuse, which was, hey, do you want to quit your job in finance in order to write this book with me? Who knows what's going to happen afterwards, but it could be a lot of fun. And I decided to take the leap. They say if you're given the chance to get on a rocket ship, you don't ask which seat, you just hop on the rocket ship and hold on for dear life. The book came out in 2000. That first book came out in 2016. They say that luck is the combination of preparation and good timing. So we'd prepared, we'd written this book, which we thought was, pretty interesting and compelling, but we also benefited from great timing. The book came out in a period, 2016, when all of a sudden there was a much broader audience that was trying to understand what was this technology? Did it matter to them? Could it be applied to their business? Should they be investing in it? And we were really the only book out there to explain it in terms that they could comprehend. And as a result, that book became, very successful and has since been translated into over 19 languages worldwide. The success of that book has also allowed us to do a lot of really interesting things as well. The Blockchain Research Institute is one of the largest independent think tanks investigating blockchain use cases opportunities and challenges for enterprises and institutions. And a lot of the research from the BRI, as we call it, formed the foundation for the work that I later did in writing the book Web3, which is coming out in September.
Wow. Okay, that's thanks for that rundown. Can you define some of these terms? So let's just assume that many of the people listening, like you just dropped the term Web3. Some people call it Web 3.0. You also define blockchain. I see in your latest book, the back of the book, NFT, DeFi, metaverse. These are not everyday terms. So let's just start with what you think are the most important concepts and terms, and just define them, and why you think people should know about them.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think blockchains are foundational to the next era of the internet. And I'll explain what I mean. See, when you use the internet today to send and move information, to access information, you're not really sending an original, unique thing. You're sending a version or a copy. So, if I send you an email, I can send the same email to someone else. If I post something on social media, anybody can access it. If I, write an entry in Wikipedia or have something on a website, it's available for all to see. And that's one of the most powerful things about the internet. It's like a printing press for information. And in a lot of ways, it's helped to democratize access to information and to publishing for people, at least those who have access to the internet. But when it comes to things that have value, things like money or titles and deeds or stocks or bonds or votes or IP, art, collectibles, like you name it, things that require scarcity in order to have value, being able to create copies is obviously not such a good idea. So, instead of having, sending you an email, I needed to send you some money. It's important that when you receive it, you've got the only version, that I can't send the exact same money to someone else. Because if I can copy money like I can copy information, the money becomes worthless. And this is basically a computer science problem called the double spend problem that smart people have been trying to figure out for a long time. How do you ensure that when you move something of value digitally, that you can't send the same thing twice? And because it's such a difficult problem to solve, through the first era of the internet, we still relied on intermediaries, middlemen, platforms, to sit in the center of transactions and to create trust and to perform all the sort of transactions and processing that are required in order for the economy to function. What blockchains do basically is disintermediate the middleman. So instead of relying on an individual, middleman to sit in the center of transactions and create trust, instead transactions occur in a network, and transactions in that network are recorded to a distributed ledger, what's called a blockchain. Anybody can see what's in the blockchain, everyone can trust what is on the blockchain, but no single entity can alter the blockchain. If you wanted to send the same, asset twice on a blockchain network, you'd have to rewrite the whole history of commerce on the network in plain view of everybody else who can see what's happening. So that's just functionally very difficult. So blockchains are a new foundation for an internet of value. So that's number one. And that was the insight for blockchain revolution. When we wrote blockchain revolution, the value of all digital assets that existed on blockchains was maybe $10 billion. And today it's over $1.5 trillion. And I think we're still very, early in that development. Web3 is a related term, but it's a bit different. So I'll just, if you don't mind, indulge me, I'll spend a moment describing that.
Sure.
So Web 1, so the internet and the web are different concepts. I think a lot of people think of them as the same thing. The internet was actually developed in the 60s as a project funded by the Department of Defense to build a decentralized communication network that could stay up and running in the event of a Soviet nuclear attack. See, at the time, all transmissions, all communications went through a central hub in New York City. And, the government was worried rightly that if that thing got hit by a bomb, that they wouldn't be able to send nuclear codes to other silos around the country. Little known historical factoid. But and so for decades, like the 60s, 70s, 80s, the internet was really just a tool used by academics, technologists, people in government, real hardcore enthusiasts. It wasn't until the invention of the World Wide Web in 1989 and the commercialization of the web with the web browser that the internet actually became a commercial tool and a tool used by everyday people. And the first era of the web, what we now call Web 1, was really that .com era. I'm just old enough to remember this period of time, but the web in the 1990s was static, it was fairly primitive, and most importantly, it was really a one-way medium. So you would go online, you would log on to a web browser, you would go to a website, and you'd be able to consume information or consume content. And a lot of the early examples of websites really kind of copied or mimicked what had come before. So you could go to see, the sports scores or the classifieds, or you could go on to Britannica Online, or you could look up a map or something like that. The information that was on the website was read only, meaning you could read it, but you couldn't interact with it. In the early 2000s, the combination of new technologies and evolving user behavior led to the creation of this new web, Web 2, or what we call the read-write web. So in Web 2, the web went from a platform for consuming content to a platform for communication, for publishing. And the defining sort of term of that era was user-generated content. And the defining business model of Web 2 was social media. But what happened in Web 2 was all of this value that was created by people uploading their own content, citizen journalists and photo bloggers and people building communities on Facebook and Instagram and elsewhere, ended up getting captured asymmetrically by a handful of very large platforms that basically took user data and turned it into advertising dollars. And as a result, these major platforms have in turn helped to sort of stifle innovation and also undermine the privacy of the people who rely on them. So Web3 promises a big rethink of how the web works. If Web 1 democratized access to information and Web 2 democratized access to publishing, then Web 3 democratizes access to ownership. So what does that mean? Well, it means ownership of our data, ownership of our identities, and ownership of our digital goods. Tokens, the foundational sort of asset of blockchains and of Web3, are being developed to represent, many, many different kinds of things of value. Everything from the digital goods that we buy in virtual worlds like video games, to money and financial assets, to art and collectibles, IP, and much, much more. So if you think about this as the next era of the web, you can imagine how it will be not only a foundational technology for business, but could also change society in some sort of profound and unexpected ways. As internet users become owners, the dynamic between them and the services they rely on changes pretty significantly.
And can you also talk about the metaverse and NFTs? Because I think those tie into blockchain and Web 3.0 as well.
Yeah, without a doubt. NFTs, so let me take a step back. So I've used a couple of terms here which may require some explanation. So the word token, for example. So I think a lot of people look at the world of blockchain and crypto and they think, okay, there are all these different coins, and all of these different coins, they call them cryptocurrencies. But why do we need thousands of different kinds of currencies? We have a system today with a couple hundred currencies issued by governments, and that's not a system that seems to work very well. So how does thousands of currencies solve the problem? And the answer to that is that most crypto assets, most tokens, are not currencies. They're not trying to be currencies. Something like Bitcoin may be trying to be a currency, but most other assets fall into some other category. So the best way to think about this is that tokens are like containers for value. Think of a shipping container. And in the same way that a shipping container can contain, anything, furniture, food, computers, whatever, a token can contain anything of value. It's programmable. And that means it can contain all those different kinds of assets I've described. One of the types of assets that it can contain is a thing called an NFT. An NFT stands for a non-fungible token. And simply put, all it means is that an NFT is a unique digital good, which can't easily be swapped for another digital good. So if you think about, like, say, dollars, right, US dollars, every US dollar is what they call fungible. So if you have a US dollar bill and I have a $1 bill and we swap them, then it doesn't really matter, right? You still have a dollar, I still have a dollar. But if you've got something unique, what's the thing that's unique? I don't know, a piece of art, for example, or maybe the title or deed to your home. You can't trade your home for my home because our homes are slightly different. And you've got a piece of art and I've got a piece of art. We can't just trade those things because they're slightly different. So those are examples of what you call non-fungible assets. They're unique. And so a non-fungible token is just simply put a way to represent an asset which is unique. Now, the reason it's gained so much in popularity is because a lot of digital goods these days are art or collectibles and other sort of unique digital identifiers. And so NFTs are being used as a really useful way to create marketplaces in those kinds of assets. One example of this is our identities. So there's a Naresh, virtual Naresh, there's a virtual Alex, and your digital self and my digital self are different. We can use NFTs as a way to create identifiers for our personal data, which means that we can track how that data is used and we can ensure we get compensated for it. So that's just another example of how they're being employed. The concept of a metaverse is yet another term which is related to Web3, but is not synonymous or interchangeable with Web3. So, the metaverse is like a much hyped topic in business. We heard a lot about it last year and the year before. It seems to have died down somewhat, but most analysts and thoughtful people agree that the opportunity is significant. The metaverse basically describes a persistent virtual space where or shared reality where individuals can interact online, typically through things like virtual reality and augmented reality. But my view is that a lot of the examples of metaverses that are being built by companies like Facebook, for example, aren't really metaverses at all. So they're really more like sort of a digital Disneyland, where you go into Facebook's virtual world and you play by their rules and you pay their fees and they take your data. And in exchange, you get access to some experience, which is maybe fun. In a lot of ways, it's like Disneyland. You go to Disneyland, you can have experiences, buy goods, but ultimately it all benefits a single company. And in the end, it doesn't really matter. In my opinion, if we want to create a alternate plane of reality online where people are going to be spending a lot of time and spending a lot of dollars and having rich, interactions and building communities, then we need to ensure that that metaverse has all the same principles as the real world, or at least the real world in places like the States and Canada, where I live, which is that individuals should have a right to property. They should have a right to privacy. They should be able to control their identities, their digital selves. If they own and buy assets in one world, they should be able to take them to another without having to pay a penalty or a fee. Right now, that's not the model that is being envisioned by many big companies. Most of these big internet companies want to perpetuate the economic model of Web 2, which is simply we create a walled garden, we curate an experience, you enter that world, we make it difficult for you to leave, and all of the value that you create, we take a significant chunk of it. That to me is an unsustainable model if we believe that in the future people are going to be spending more time in these virtual worlds. So to me, a Web3 metaverse isn't something that's accessible by virtual reality or augmented reality, or at least not necessarily. It's a new shared reality online where we have all of those same rights that we have in the offline world as well.
All right, so we set the stage, that the basis of this conversation, defining these terms, and to me, almost everything that you talked about still sounds so theoretical, because I think people are they wake up, they go to work, they take care of their kids, they don't really think about these things because they don't need to. And the first time I heard about Bitcoin, really only Bitcoin, was in 2013, so probably even shortly before you did. And I remember reading about it and the blockchain and hearing people say pretty much what you said in 2013 and 2014, and this is the next big thing, and it's going to change medicine, and it's going to change banking and finance and real estate, and it's going to change our lives. And here we are in 2023, and I haven't seen it adopted on the mainstream level yet. Is that going to come? Whereas I've seen, like, let's just take ChatGPT, for example. Like, in a matter of 3 months, that gained mass adoption, and they're just scratching the surface. They're artificial intelligence. So why is it taking so long for things like NFTs, the metaverse, blockchain, cryptocurrency to gain that mass adoption?
It's a fair point, Naresh, but I would point you to a couple of things. So a lot of the technologies well, the one that you just referred to, like AI, AI, we forget that, the first person to investigate AI was the inventor of the computer himself, Alan Turing. And AI is one of these overnight success stories that's been many, many decades in the making. The current fervor, moral panic that a lot of people are experiencing over AI isn't even our first moral panic about artificial intelligence. There have been many attempts at AI over the years which have fallen flat. And you could point to other technologies too, like, I'm sure you guys have talked about like Apple's Vision Pro headset on the show, the new device, the new sort of computer, like, headset computer from Apple. I don't know how old you are, but you may recall, like in the 1990s, Nintendo had this virtual reality headset you could plug into your Super NES, and it was a disaster and it flopped.
Yeah, I remember that.
There have been so many attempts at virtual reality and augmented reality over the years. Google Glass was 2014. I don't know if you recall that product. And then you could point to so many other technologies, like, self-driving cars. I remember reading the first article about self-driving cars in National Geographic in the 1990s when I was a little kid, and thinking it was right around the corner, and we still haven't gotten there. So anyway, I'm not trying to sound like a techno-pessimist. I'm just simply saying that sometimes, it's the classic sort of S-curve with technology, right? Which is that, in the early years, things progress at a relatively slow rate or with relatively low adoption, and then they hit an inflection point where that adoption curve spikes significantly, and innovation spikes in that period of time, and that's the period of like profound change. And then towards the end, you get this period where things level off, where every incremental dollar and time unit put into new technology leads to diminished returns, right? So I would say that with certain technologies, like say AI, or at least large language models, which is what you were referring to, we're definitely in that steep part of the S curve. When it relates to Web3 and blockchain, I don't think we've had our Chat GPT moment yet, but I think it's incorrect to say that there hasn't been significant adoption or change since the first time that you investigated this technology. When Bitcoin came about, or at least I should say, when it first started to capture people's attention, which was in that sort of 2013, 14 timeframe, the value of the asset itself was pretty small. It was a few $1 billion, and today it's almost $500 billion. So value alone is not a measure of success per se, but the value translates into adoption. So Bitcoin today, according to most estimates, like things like Chainalysis, is a very useful company that does work in this space, is held by hundreds of millions of people. And according to the data, like somewhere between 15 and 20% of people in North America actually own Bitcoin or have exposure to it in some form. Beyond Bitcoin, though, and looking at the Web3 and some of these other themes, there are some really interesting examples. So for example, NFTs. So NFTs are fundamentally ways for digital creators to earn value. And in the last couple of years, the total transaction volume in NFTs has been over $20 billion. And the original fees paid to creators, so like the amount that they've sold their digital goods for, last year alone was over $5 billion. Just to put that into context, that's actually more money than Spotify paid out to every single musician on its entire platform in the same period of time. So NFTs as a tool that creators are using to monetize their culture, monetize their creation, has already become a really, really powerful and very useful tool for a lot of people. Another example is in financial services. You mentioned, Bitcoin is going to revolutionize, banking and so forth. Obviously, we have banks today, and I think we're going to continue to have banks today. But there is this frontier of financial services in Web3, which is very exciting, and it's called decentralized finance, or DeFi. I mean, ultimately, the financial services industry, is more than any single industry. It's the lifeblood of global commerce. It's the thing that keeps all the money moving. But really, it just performs a bunch of basic functions: a way to move value, store value, access credit, exchange assets, connect investors with startups and entrepreneurs, organize financial information, insure against risk, confirm your identity, and so forth. In each of those different categories, there are dozens of projects in the world of decentralized finance that are doing this. Today, DeFi is small. It's not, I would not say it's mainstream at all, but it's also growing enormously quickly. The first year we have data for it, it was 2020. There were about 100,000 people using it. And today, in 2023, the estimate's closer to 7 million. So that's a significant increase. Another really interesting area that I think is I expect to grow significantly over the next little while is in payments, using blockchains for payments, and specifically a thing called a stable coin. So a stable coin is, apropos of my earlier comment about tokens are containers for value. In this case, a stable coin is a container that contains regular money, US dollars held in a bank account, and the token is just a way to represent that value online. And the value of stable coins has increased over the last few years from basically zero, as with most things in this industry, to well over $100 billion. And over the last year or two, like stablecoin volumes on platforms like Ethereum are in the trillions, way higher than payment applications like, say, Venmo, for example. So, you're right. It's not, I wouldn't say that we're all logging on to the blockchain, but I also think that most people who are interacting with this technology won't realize they're interacting with this technology in the same way that a lot of people don't really think of the internet when they use mobile web applications or when they use their smartphone. They just are using it because it's useful or fun or it's solving a problem for them. And I think the same is going to be true here. So I think it's it's a fair point, and I think it's an interesting thing to tease out. But I also think that we are nearing, in my opinion, an inflection point. We're going to hit that steep part of the S curve for Web3.
Well, that was going to be my next question, and that is the inflection point. Because based on talking to you, and thanks for all the information, by the way. You know your stuff very well, and you're doing a great job of explaining things. But it could go one of two ways, and I think people think one of two things. Either, hey, we're going to reach that inflection point and we're going to have that AI chat GPT moment within the next few years, or could this be just a big bubble, a big fad of people who are just gambling with the NFTs, with Bitcoin, going on. I lost money in Voyager, which was supposed to be a decentralized financial platform. So are we going to see that inflection point anytime soon, or could this just be one big fad that this Satoshi Nakamoto guy, who no one knows who he is, if he even exists, and this entire bubble is just going to be some type of tulip mania for all this stuff? And I'm not on the latter side, simply because when Facebook changes its name to Meta, and when I know they were developing a coin themselves, I believe they stopped. I know Tesla was investing a lot of its in-house corporate treasury into Bitcoin, and it stopped. There are other companies like MicroStrategy. I know Wall Street's now getting in big. I just feel like, hey, when everyone else is getting in, when the big dogs are getting into this space, it's got to be for real, and it's only a matter of time. That's how I see it, without really using my brain and thinking for myself. That's how I see it.
Well, you've raised a few interesting points, which I think are worth teasing out a little bit. So I think that there probably is a culture of speculation in crypto assets. And the reason for that is that, this is a new technology toolkit, which makes it really easy to launch a new organization with a native asset, with a token. In the same way that the internet made it really easy to launch a website. And so there are a lot of people, this is, I would say, broadened the surface area for launching new projects, and inevitably many of the projects are going to fail. And that's been true for startups throughout history, and people speculating on the success of any single startup could end up losing their money, and that's a reality. I also think that because it's a technology that also has its own asset class, we can see how the price moves in real time. Most AI startups for the last 30 years have been private companies or research initiatives, in universities or done at the sort of governance or non-for-profit level, whatever. And so there's no token where you can see the value of interest in AI over time. Only more recently, now that we have, a few of these companies, like some of the big companies are public, like Microsoft, Google, and others, can we see the financial effect of AI on the valuation of businesses? Like Microsoft today, the share price is at an all-time high, driven primarily by a euphoria in the market about AI. But it's also possible in 6 months' time, as that euphoria dies out and we face the real challenges of implementing AI, that maybe the stock price tanks, and so it loses $100 billion, which, by the way, wouldn't be very much, in the context of a company that is a $2.5 trillion market cap. But anyway, I digress. So I think that because there's a value associated with the technology because of tokens, we can see how interest moves over time, how it waxes and wanes per se. But what's interesting is that I don't think that this is a bubble, obviously, because I see the real value of blockchains and of Web3 in practice, whether it's in cultural industries, whether it's in financial services, and I think soon other industries as well, gaming, for example. But also, bubbles generally don't reinflate, like the tulip bubble, burst, grew and then burst. But what we've seen in the world of blockchain is that instead of bubbles, I would call them cycles. And with every cycle, the highs get higher and the lows get higher in terms of the value, the number of users, the usefulness of the technology, and so forth. Today we're off our highs for sure in terms of the value of some of these assets. But at $1 trillion+ of market value for all digital goods, we're an order of magnitude higher than we were the last time around. And so I just expect that, with a technology that has a token, or has a way to sort of value it in real time, you're going to see how people sort of speculate, how they try and anticipate the next move and so forth. There's another, I think, maybe deeper point that we should make, which is that just because a technology is inherently useful and potentially very disruptive, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be widely adopted or successful. And I think that's something that most people don't appreciate. They assume, well, the best technology will win out. We've known for 50 years that nuclear power, for example, is a safe and renewable source of energy that could address many of our energy needs. But the collapse of Chernobyl and the meltdown of Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island and a couple of these other events basically handicapped the industry forever. And even today, it's still stigmatized. And look, those were traumatic events, Chernobyl in particular. But more people die every year drilling oil wells than died in the entire Chernobyl blast, right? So even though a technology is inherently useful, public perception of it and also regulatory headwinds can inhibit its growth. With the first era of the internet and Web 1 and Web 2, we had a regulatory tailwind for the internet. There was a creation of a new set of laws called the Telecommunications Act in 1996, and changes to some other statutes, which basically made it easy for platforms to grow without worrying about copyright infringement. So if someone posted something online, and it was copyrighted and they were using it improperly, internet service providers and platforms were not necessarily going to be held liable for that. And that actually helped the internet to grow and proliferate significantly. Today with Web3, we're in this world where we don't really have a regulatory tailwind like that, because there's been a lot of inertia in government to try and address this new technology. And in the end, what we have is what I think is a regulatory headwind, which is that absent new policies and a framework to help this industry grow, which is what we saw with the first era of the internet, we have regulation by enforcement, where regulators are basically saying all tokens or all digital assets fall into one or two categories, like say securities, for example, which is like stocks and bonds. And that kind of thing, I think, is probably going to limit the growth. So That's all to say, just because something is useful doesn't mean it's therefore destined for greatness. And we need, different stakeholders in the economy and society sort of pulling in in the same direction towards a common goal. So I think that if you were to look at the implementation challenges, like why Web3 could fail or why it will fail to reach its potential, you could list several of them. One is there a culture of speculation which is inherently damaging for the asset class? Possibly, that's the thing that you raised. Is there risk that governments will fail to create the conditions for the industries to succeed? I think that's maybe a risk in the U.S., but less so in other parts of the world. Right now, places like, say, Dubai or the United Kingdom, Singapore have stated that building out Web3 as an industry is critical to the future of those countries and that economy. That's what Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, said recently when Andreessen Horowitz set up its office in London, England. Other challenges, will large companies who are threatened by this technology try to co-opt it or try to crush it in some way? TBD. I think most of the examples we've seen are of big companies actually embracing the Web3 toolkit as a way to reach new customers or to access new markets. But still, that's a legitimate threat. So all of these things exist, right? There are all these reasons why blockchain and why Web3 might not reach its potential. But we have to ask ourselves, are these reasons that it's a bad idea, or are they implementation challenges that can be overcome? And can we overcome them because the opportunity here, to, I don't know, rewrite the economic power grid, to create a new internet that's, more fair and more inclusive, where people have ways to earn and own assets and earn money globally, no matter where they are or who they are. If that's something that we think is worth working towards, then we ought to try and overcome those challenges. And that's, in my view, what I sort of view my mission as, in a way, and at least the message that I'm trying to convey in my new book, Web3. So if people would like to learn more about that, to understand these issues on a deeper level, I'd encourage them to, check out the new book.
Yep, check out the new book, Web3, Charting the Internet's Next Economic and Cultural Frontier. You can get it on Amazon. Alex Tapscott, thank you so much for joining us on the Work From Home show. Your website is alextapscott.com. Tapscott is spelled Tapscott. And then there's also your Blockchain Research Institute, BRI, that's blockchainresearchinstitute.org. You have another website which is based on your first book that you talked about, Blockchain Revolution. That's blockchain-revolution.com. That's blockchain-revolution.com. Then, of course, Ninepoint Partners, where you are a managing director. That's ninepoint.com. That's spelling out 9, N-I-N-E, ninepoint.com. Alex, before we sign off for good, you did reference this inflection point. Do you have a prediction or a timeline of when we are going to reach this inflection point? Is it coming soon? Because like I said, nobody saw this ChatGPT, and then boom, nobody saw Uber in 2013, the first time I used it. Nobody saw that, and then boom, like everyone was using it by 2015.
Yeah.
So when is that inflection point? What do you see? And then I have a follow-up to that.
Sure. Well, my answer is that the future is not something to be predicted. It's something to be achieved. I think that these things don't just happen. Like to my earlier point, it requires people, entrepreneurs, developers. Like there's no ChatGPT is based on large language model technology that's been around for a few years, but it took OpenAI and Sam Altman and other people to, package it into a consumer-facing product that everyone could instantly feel the utility and value of that technology, right? So I can't say who that's going to be or when that's going to happen, but I feel, now as I have for several, years, that this is something that cannot be ignored.
Okay, and then I have 2 young kids, and many of our listeners have kids, and what you're talking about, our children are going to be living in a very different world than the world we currently live in, just like we currently work in a very different world than how my parents worked or when they went to college. Was pre-internet, really pre-computers. I mean, computers were around, but it wasn't like you didn't need them to get your degree. Our children, I have very young children who 3 and 1. So let's just say by the time they go to college or start working 15 to 20 years from now, how different are things going to be because of Web 3.0?
What a fascinating question. I wish I had more time to talk about it and to think about it. I don't know. I honestly have no idea. I mean, how is our world different today? I have 2 young kids as well, and like in 2 decades or 18 years or 15 years from now, I mean, how is the world different now than it was, when I went to university in 2004? Profoundly different. I was one of the first people, not the first people, but the first like million people to get access to Facebook, just because the university I went to happened to be like one of the first like few hundred schools, right? Like I think that was true for a lot of kids that went to American colleges in that period of time. And there had been social media applications in the past, but they were not widely used by the mainstream, and they were sort of chaotic and anarchic. And Facebook was the first company to come along and create this curated walled garden of experience. But it still felt very open and innocent at the time. Who could have possibly predicted in 2004 the way in which social media companies and big digital conglomerates would come to utterly dominate both our time online, but also the economic productivity and growth of the stock market and the value of business and in the world. Like, it would have been very difficult I think at that time to have predicted that. So it's hard. I'm not going to make a prediction on the end of the year, and I'm probably not going to make one for 15 years from now. But I think what that example teaches us is that once again, technology is not a panacea, right? It's not like a fix-all for the world's problems. There's a cliche, but the fire was one of the first sort of human technologies, and you can use fire to heat your home or to cook your food, or you can use it to burn down the village next door or the people that you hate or whatever. So technology is a tool that can be used in ways both good and bad. I think broadly speaking, the spread of technology has been a massive tailwind for human flourishing over the many centuries. Like, obviously life today is a lot better than it was pre-industrial era and probably a lot better than it was 50 years ago for most people. But that doesn't mean necessarily that technology is always a good thing, right? And that goes back to the earlier point I made about how it's wielded and who's wielding it and to what end. So I'm hopeful, looking at how Web3 is being employed today, that in 10 or 15 years it will have had a broadly positive impact on the world. It will have improved access to financial services for people around the world, but also just for everyday internet users. It will turn internet users into owners of the platforms and services that they rely upon, and that means that they'll have an economic upside, and in those platforms they'll have a say in how they're governed, and the experience online will be one that is maybe more fulfilling and enriching financially, but also one that is more private and secure. But again, that's something that needs to be achieved by the people building this out.
Alex Tapscott, once again, thank you so much for joining us on the show. To all our listeners, check us out at workfromhomeshow.com. Get on our mailing list. If you have any questions or thoughts about Web3, about anything Alex discussed, feel free to email us, hello@workfromhomeshow.com. That's hello@workfromhomeshow.com. You can follow us on social media. Just type in Work From Home Show. You'll see us on some of these companies that we mentioned. Facebook, for example. I know Twitter's working on some things as well. So we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on LinkedIn. So check us out there. And until next week, keep on working from home.